in your opinion, how would you define fluency?
So, I guess fluency to me is, I think what people are thinking in their mind is, can you get around in most situations that you would need to use that language? Can you speak to a high, like, probably an advanced level, but they wouldn't necessarily, but they're not really thinking that in those terms. They're just thinking, like, are you really good at it?
What is up, everyone, and welcome to our third episode of LingoCast.
Yeah.
I'm your host, Felipe, and we're with Sophie again.
Ciao, amici.
Hey. And today we're going to ask a very interesting question. What's fluency? If someone, a lot of people ask me, okay, how many languages you speak? How many, okay, there was supposed to be a release there. How many languages do you speak? And then I'm like, well, depends. And then now the question, okay, how well you speak them? And I'm like, well, they're all at different levels. And so if someone asks that, it's probably because they're very skeptical about it, and they really want to get you. But there's an interesting thing in that. How does one define fluency?
Right.
And that's what we're going to talk about today, because people define fluency in different ways.
Yes.
Right? And in your opinion, how would you define fluency?
Great question. I remember talking in a linguistics class before that the word fluency, or being fluent in a language, is not a very scientific way to talk about our level in a language. But that being said, I don't think it's going to change anytime soon that people ask, how fluent are you? Are you fluent? Just in conversation. So I guess fluency to me is, I think what people are thinking in their mind is, can you get around in most situations that you would need to use that language? Can you speak to a high, like, probably an advanced level, but they wouldn't necessarily, but they're not really thinking that in those terms. They're just thinking, like, are you really good at it?
Yes, that's literally what they mean. But the thing is that they have no idea, because not all languages are equal in that sense. The best example for that is Arabic, because Arabic has a diglossia. Diglossia basically means that there's one language for speaking and another language for writing, and yet they call it the same language. But when you, as an outsider, look at it, you're like, these are two different languages. What the frick? It's kind of like, the way I like to define it is, Portuguese, Spanish. There's Portuguese and Spanish and Italian. Tie them all up together, call them dialects of each other, and then have everybody write Italian. No, not Italian. Write Latin. Oh, sorry. Then have everybody write Latin. So that's how I define diglossia in a way. You have dialects, and then you have the written formal language.
Okay.
And Arabic is like that. And I've gotten in an argument with a guy before about this. Like, no, they're the same language. They're just different variants of the same language. I'm like, well, how do you define that? How? Right. Because then there's the linguistic distance, but that's beside the point. The point is that you're not considered, you never considered fluent in Arabic unless you know the high standard Arabic, the Fusha as they call it.
Okay.
So you might know the dialect, and that's and we're going to talk about this right now. The protocols of the language testing thing. What's it called? I think here in the U.S. it's called ACTFL.
Right. The organization that kind of manages language testing.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, they're very good. They can get a pretty accurate idea. So we both have taken ACTFL tests. I've taken the OPI for Arabic,
which is oral proficiency interview.
Exactly. I've also taken a TOEFL, which is not from ACTFL, but it's a different thing. It's from, I think, BTI. I forgot the name. They're the parent company that does it, but it's basically the test that you need to take if you're an international student to come to study in an English-speaking country. So they all accept it. There's TOEFL, and I think there's IELTS. There's these two, but I took the TOEFL one. So tell me about your experience taking the OPI. What OPIs have you taken, and what was your experience with it?
So I've only actually taken OPICs, which are computer versions of them, so you're not talking to another human on the phone.
Okay, tell about the OPI, how it works.
So the idea is to assess your proficiency in speaking your second language or your foreign language. So they give you it, and they call it an interview because the tester usually, like for the full OPI, it's like someone on the phone. For the OPIC, it's just the computer program that has like an avatar of a person, and it just asks you questions, and then you have a certain amount of time to respond, and you're just trying to show off what you can do in the language, right? Grammatically and with vocabulary and all sorts of things. So they'll ask you questions like, are you in school right now? Like, what do you study? Do you live with roommates? Tell me about a time when you had to talk to your landlord about something. They just want you to use different tenses, different kind of parts of the language. So I've taken the OPIC for French and Spanish, and it's an interesting experience to have. It's very automated, obviously, online. You have 30 seconds or 1 minute or whatever it might be, and then it cuts off and you're on to the next thing. So, which is a little different than just having a kind of normal conversation with the tester, even though obviously there's some limits to it. But yeah, it is a good measure of, as far as I understand it, is a good measure of our like speaking proficiency. If you can elaborate on something, if you can tell a story, if you can talk about, if you are at a level where you can talk about like global issues, right? And like, so it tests, it tries to get a range of like the way you use your language, if you can do it.
So she shared about her experience in French and Spanish, and I'm gonna share a bit about my experience in Arabic and English, and they're in different categories because I've taken so TOEFL was the first proficiency test I've ever taken in my life, the official one, and every international student needs to take that. That's a given, and I remember that my first one was pretty okay, but my second one was better. So they will measure the your writing, speaking, reading, and listening. They'll measure all four skills, and I think it's a scale of 120. And so they're gonna have 30 each, and then they're gonna sum the whole thing, and it has to measure up to 120. Okay. So you can need at least 104. No, you need to at least get, depending on the university, depending on in community colleges, they need at least 70.
Okay.
And in universities, they need 90 or more. Okay. Or 85 or more, or maybe I remember in some high universities they need 100 or more.
Okay.
My first TOEFL was 94, and my second one was 104.
Oh, nice.
So it has improved by 10 points.
Nice.
Basically, the way it works is just your typical reading. It just wants to measure how good you do in academic settings. So like to have a recording of someone who, listen to this recording in a science class or in a history class, and then you listen to your professor, and then it's like, what did he say? What was the content about? What was what does this mean? And the reading is all like they'll give you an article and you have to read. It's like, okay, what does this word mean? What was the content? Reorganize the structure. Make sure the article makes sense. And then writing, they'll have an essay. But the interesting one is the speaking section. The speaking section seems like it's the same thing as the OPIC, which is a computerized thing. Then it's like, tell me about your city, and then you have 1 minute to say it.
Right.
And then and they gave it as a technique that was, okay, sorry, first, the second this, elaborate by points. So you have your whole thing organized, because it's more about how you presented the information than how you actually
rambling.
If you're just rambling, if you can speak. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a problem with stutter, and in case if many of you have noticed, I stutter a lot. But yet, in tests like that, it can maybe be a sign of, okay, he's probably not as proficiency, so right. Probably not as proficient in the language as someone else. But I stutter in all languages I speak, so it's a thing that I have.
Yeah.
So So it's in the and so that's my experience with the TOEFL. The experience with the OPI was when I took an Arabic class, my last Arabic class, which was basically focused on speaking.
Mm.
The last thing we needed to do was take the OPI,
Mm.
and I went to a phone booth, and a call wasn't a call. The call of typical call quality,
Uh-huh.
and the person started speaking in high Arabic.
Okay.
So I needed to speak in high Arabic to her, and there was a woman, and she was like, "Oh, you can speak in um, a dialect if you want to." But then again, it gives you the freedom to speak in a dialect. But there are certain topics. But the cool thing about the OPI is that the more the tester, the evaluator feels that your Arabic is at, it gets harder and harder.
Sure.
The questions that you need to elaborate. For example, in the beginning, she's like, "Oh, tell me about your city," and then you just go ham,
Mm.
and then she's like, "Okay," and then for me, she was like, "Okay, he knows that. Let's make." Tell me about your future careers.
Uh-huh.
And so these corresponds to the different levels of proficiency. So yeah,
Right.
I think it was novice,
Novice. Uh-huh.
novice, intermediate, and advanced. And then in these categories, there's low, mid, and high. So
Right.
there's in my Arabic, I got advanced low
Nice.
because she went up a notch.
Right.
But when she was trying to get me to speak, and then it got to me to a point where it's like, I told her like, I really enjoy reading about youth and drugs, right? And she's
Mhm.
like, and she said, "Oh, how does drugs affect the youth
Mhm.
in a country?" And then that was when then she knows that I was struggling a little bit to express that idea or making
Right.
mistakes. And when she sees that I'm making a lot of mistakes, when she sees that I'm having a hard time expressing that, then she's like, "Okay, that's his level.
Right.
That's his limit."
Yes.
And I think that the superior level is more abstract philosophical stuff. What's the meaning of life? What do you think
Definitely.
about this moral issues,
Definitely.
dilemmas? And so when you get to this level, that's when that's what the at least the actful considers. Okay, this person's at a superior level because they can express this idea.
Right. Yeah. And so I guess the question that comes to me, and there's other language proficiency exams.
Yes.
Obviously, there's CEFR and
CIFR. CIFR is the
CIFR.
European one. So most people are familiar with the European one, the A1 to C2,
Right.
there's a if you can look online and find a way to
Like conversion.
convert that to the actful one.
Mhm.
So
But I guess the question that this bears for me is, what effect did having like a scientific kind of evaluation of your language versus just saying like I'm really good at it or whatever? What did like a scientific evaluation of your language do for you mentally in how you perceived like how good I am at this language?
I have a good friend that talked to me about that. He when I told him my score, he's like, "No way, your Arabic is an advanced low. They're lying to you. Your Arabic is way better."
Oh.
And then kind of like I wanted to get at least an advanced mid
Uh-huh.
or maybe an advanced high, but I got an advanced low.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, "Your Arabic is light years better than mine," and I got an advanced high. It's like I was like, "What makes you say that?" It's like because I'm a good test taker.
Right.
It's like
Yeah.
I'm a good test taker. I review my notes and I have a good memory about certain structures, and I can memorize structures very well. And and this can kind of trip them a little bit. So I'm good at that. So this guy, I'm good at that. It's a skill. I can even teach you how to do that.
Sure.
So I'm like, so there's a skill in test taking that I don't know about. So
Right.
there's that too. You can be a very good test taker and still get a good score.
That's a good
I
point.
consider myself an average test taker. So
Yeah, that's a good point.
and for me, because a lot of times I stumble a lot in my speech, as you guys can notice it here. I do that even in Portuguese.
Mm-hmm.
But the question is, does that translate into lack of proficiency in the language? And does that so a lot of people might consider, oh yeah, how does that carry over, right?
Right.
With especially the language like Arabic. In my case, I'm very good at the dialect.
Uh-huh.
The Syrian dialect is the dialect I speak. But then again, you move to the High Arabic, and of course I struggle. But the thing is, even natives struggle at it.
Sure.
Even natives told me, it's like, a lot of natives can't even speak in High Arabic,
Mm.
and yet you can do it a lot better. But they will know it. They will know. They'll be able to understand. But speaking, they'll confuse it. They'll say, especially certain I'll say the lower class, they really struggle with that. So
Mm.
and that comes to the another question: what is the difference between a proficient person and a native speaker?
Mm.
What's your opinion about that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. We've talked a little bit about how um, being a native speaker of a language, or maybe a heritage speaker of a language, or something like this, where you're born in a place or you're born in a setting,
Yes.
like your family, where a language is being taught or being used,
Mm-hmm.
and yet you don't acquire it fully or to the extent that other people around you are acquiring it.
Mm-hmm.
And so you might have a label of like a native speaker and yet not be as proficient as someone who has learned that language as a second language. And so, and you can see that, I think, when we talked about like, I don't know what the right term is, kind of like metalinguistic awareness, like kind of knowing if you're able to explain things about your own language,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of us are not super good at that in our first languages because we acquire it just as infants,
Uh-huh.
observing, learning, And so, whereas if I study French, I can explain things in French better sometimes than I can in English. And so, that might come out if you try to, and maybe some of you have had this experience where,
Mm-hmm.
like in French, sometimes I'll ask a native French speaker, why is it this way? And they can't explain it to me. They're native, they know the language, but they have a hard time explaining to me. And I don't know, and that can vary as well. I think some people who are bilingual or consider one of their languages a heritage language
Mm-hmm.
kind of run into that of if they can't explain something, they feel like they don't know it as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. There's kind of a mixture there of like whether you're able to communicate, whether you're able to explain things about your language, and how that kind of qualifies you as a native speaker or not. What do you think?
That's a very, very interesting thing, because I've seen it. It can also depend on the topic too.
Mm.
Like I've seen people who are from India say, "Oh, when I'm talking about everyday life, I speak Hindi or Gujarati or Tamil with or Kannada with my family, but I don't know these terms in technology. And when I speak
Sure.
technology, when I speak work, I can only do it in English.
Sure.
So there's also the idea of is because the thing is about our societies, the Western world at least is very monolingual.
Right.
So we think language this, language that, but then again, language. There was even a class, I think you were with me, where we talked about in some natives in, I think in I don't know if it was Ecuador or Guatemala, where in work settings they would speak Spanish, and at home they'll speak their native language.
Sure.
But the thing is, does it mean that they know their native language just as well as Spanish, or does it mean that it's kind of like the same diglossia thing in Spanish, no, in Arabic?
Right.
Does it mean that they are able to function the same way? Because I wonder myself, okay, if we took your native from Ecuador or Guatemala and had them tested in their dialect, in what they speak in their everyday life, not as something formalized, a formal language,
Right.
would they come out with would they have a superior level at it?
Mm.
Would they be able to express ideas of life or drug problems to someone who was asking? That's the
Right.
thing. Or would they be like, no, there's a setting where you only use Spanish.
Yeah, I've never used that language to talk about that.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So this things actually exist.
Yeah.
And that's something we don't take into account when we're talking about language proficiency.
I think that's a really great point, that like language situations in different countries,
yes.
different places are very nuanced, whereas like for a lot of us Americans growing up, it's like
Not even America, just like the Western world in general.
sure. I guess I'm just speaking about like for like what I know about, I guess. But yeah, like of course I use English for everything, and I don't. We have different registers. We use different
Yes.
vocabulary and different things in different scenarios, but it doesn't vary so much as like two different languages that I would use in different settings, like in a lot of places in the world.
Yeah, like a lot of I've had experience in with people from French-speaking Africa. Africa is probably the one of the most diverse places in the world when
Sure.
it comes to language.
Yeah.
And every village, every area in one country will have different languages, and sometimes, and they use the European language, French or English, sometimes as the lingua franca to communicate with each other,
Yeah.
because they don't know each other's language.
Yeah.
So there's that too. But it comes again, will they be able to express if they took a TOEFL or an ACTFL test in their home language, will they be able to express? So the question comes again. So it puts a new perspective into the idea of being a native speaker or being a proficient speaker. And then again, let's not forget that language is, I would say, proficiency and knowledge and usage of the language is very much related to education. So people with a lower educational background would be considered by wider society, okay, he's not that good in the language.
Sure.
With that, I've had that experience myself when I was starting to become a translator. So So here's the funny thing: we both worked with translation together, but you were and the thing, the way it worked was that there was the native speaker and there was the speaker as a second language. So I was a native speaker in my group, and you were the second language speaker that was translating to French, and I was translating to Portuguese. So what was as a second language speaker? Did you have things that you knew better than the native, or were there things or? Well,
actually, that's a good question. I complain a lot that I don't have like a native intuition when I'm translating into French.
There's a big thing too.
That is true. Like it can be hard to just feel like that sounds right.
Yes.
Which my coworker could do. On the other hand, we might get to a passage, we're reading through a translation, kind of reviewing it, and I say, I don't think this verb is in the right tense. And my coworker would say, I have no idea if that's true or not. Like, in some cases, not to say that he didn't, like, he knew a lot about the language, but he didn't have, kind of like I was saying before, he grew up with the language, and so didn't have as much explicit instruction in, especially grammar. And so there were some grammatical things that I would try to say, like, this is what a verb mood is, or tense, or, like, I had to explain some of those things to him, and that was incorporated into the translation. But in a lot of ways, he had more of this kind of intuition about what sounded good,
Yeah, a Frenchmaning. And I had something similar happen to me too. But in this time, I was a native speaker. Sometimes I would just I had the stupid habit of glossing over a text and like, right, but when I looked at it again, it's like, no, there's this mistake here, this is very tiny mistake, or this very stupid typo, or this punctuation or formatting mistake. Apparently, I learned that English and Portuguese have different text formatting, and it was annoying because I was only used to English formatting, and I had to learn Portuguese formatting.
Interesting.
And that's the thing, I was supposed to learn that in school,
right,
in Brazil, but I haven't been to high school in 10 years. So I probably either never learned it or learned it but forgot it. But I learned a lot about Portuguese formatting, right? And I learned a lot about Portuguese grammar that I didn't know before. And yet my coworker who learned Portuguese as a second language and actually majored in Portuguese, he knew a lot about the grammar. He knew a lot about the nuances of the grammar. He's like, that this even the other day he wrote me, is like, did you know that this Portuguese verb is impossible to conjugate in the first person. and, and you can imagine that he would say something like that. 'Cause
Yeah.
it's like, do you know that this is impossible? Like, try to conjugate is like, the verb is uh, to go bankrupt.
Oh.
Falir.
Interesting.
Falir is like, what we did the first person. And I'm like, eu falo. It's like, you mean you speak? Like, eu falo. I'm like, or to collar. There's no way for you to express that in the first person in Portuguese. Eu coloro. I've never heard that in my life. It's like, you know that's actually nobody says that. Like, to color something, to put color. I'm like, colorir, colorir, like to colorir, but you can't say eu coloro. Ele coloriu. Ele coloriu. I'm like,
interesting.
ele colore. I'm like, yeah, that's how I would conjugate it, but it doesn't sound natural. It doesn't sound right. And so that I knew intuitively that I that this is weird and that I can't say that, but he knew the system, the syntax, the grammar well enough to say it's like, this is why you can't do it. I'm like, what?
Well, and I think sometimes there's a benefit as a language learner of coming at the language with this curiosity and like desire to understand, and just these like, I don't know, you don't have any what's the word I'm looking for? Like prejudice?
I'll say bias.
Yeah, like you're not coming at it with like prior experience in a lot of cases. And so I think that can be interesting as a language learner in kind of like in the setting you're describing, where you have a native speaker who knows and understands a lot about the language and can say whether something feels right. Mm-hmm. But you also have someone who's like spent a lot of time and effort trying to understand things, and like our friend finding that verb and remarking, like, oh, this is like impossible in this thing in the language. Whereas a lot of us in our native language wouldn't necessarily pause to think about that. It feels so natural. And so there is a benefit, I think, to like being a second language learner and seeing things in a language that a native speaker might not see.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing, because I back in the day, I was very much obsessed in being a sounding native. So I need to sound like a native speaker. I need to speak like a native speaker. But then again, if that's your goal, then great. But then you need to focus on very deep things, or you can survive a surface level, or just improve your accent. The thing is that there's that intuition. You can develop that over time by being in a place for a long, long time.
Sure. Yeah.
But then again, you're only gonna know so much about that place. And there's always I kind of looked at a job post right the other day. It's like, must be a native English speaker, and I'm like, I just looked at that and just imagining, like, I know what they mean. They mean standard white English speaker. That's what they're meaning.
Right.
But imagine someone from the down south trying to talk like that. It's like, I want to apply to this job. And like, speak with a very strong Southern accent. I'm like, does that count? That's a native speaker too.
Right.
Would you count that? It's like, no, we know exactly what they mean.
Good point,
There's like, what's the saying? Like, that doesn't mean what you think it means.
Sure. Yeah.
Or you can get someone from Nigeria that grew up with English natively, and yet have an accent in that language, and you're like, okay, that's still a native speaker. They learn natively, so that's something else. So that's the different prototypes of as like images of native speaker is already flawed itself. Of itself, and then again, you can be like, well, what about this native intuition? But then you realize that, like, well, it's connected to the place you're in.
Right.
But what if you got an Irish English speaker with a totally different intuition?
Definitely.
Or
because it's all the spectrum of.
It's all a spectrum, but then again, there you can have an idea of where you're at in the spectrum. So I think I said that, and I don't know if I said that in a past episode, but that's definitely an episode I'm gonna get in, which is that we're gonna talk about that, which is the fallacy of, it's something I discovered, which is called the appearance bias.
Oh, uh-huh.
The appearance bias. I'm gonna get it deeper into that. But basically, when I speak to people, I like to have them guess where I'm from.
Right.
And they, 95% of the time, they say, if they're very good at it, they're going to say Brazil. If they were very, very good at it. It happened to me like twice in my life. But 95% of the time, they'll say, they say 3 states in specific.
Okay.
In specific. You know what they are?
3 like countries?
3 states in the U.S.
States. Oh.
What states do you think they guess they guess where I'm from?
California.
Yes, one. Another one?
Florida.
Yes, that one. And another one.
Louisiana.
No. Texas.
Okay.
Someone from Texas would definitely be like, you're totally not from Texas. But someone who's not from there would, I don't know. I've had people guessing that I'm from Texas. So basically, 3 states with a very large Hispanic population.
Yeah. So what they're trying to get at.
So they're trying to get at. I was like, okay, you're a native speaker, but you grew up here speaking Spanish. Kind of like our friend. So they do have. So people do have that. After I convince them that I'm not gonna get offended if they get it wrong.
So this is you speaking to someone in English, and you ask them where you think.
Yes.
Gotcha.
So I'm like, okay. They think that my English is at a native level.
Right.
But they do consider me a native speaker just by listening to me for 1 minute.
Sure.
Right now you're probably like, oh, definitely not a native speaker. He's made tens and thousands of mistakes. Just saying there I can see some phonological patterns that are weird. His accent's kind of off, but it doesn't distract me. I can get the message in, and I've gotten that. Especially if people listen to me for a while, if they live with me,
sure,
they're like, okay, it's near that level of native speaker, but definitely not a native speaker.
Sure.
But then again, this happens to me in Portuguese too. And so I asked myself, like, well, what the frick, right?
Yeah.
I do have a very interesting accent when I speak Portuguese. And when I speak Portuguese, I also make mistakes. I notice my mistakes and I correct them too, just like I'm doing right now. So I kind of consider like, well, are they the same level? If I talk about linguistics, I'll have a hard time expressing all I'd learned about linguistics in Portuguese.
Right, because you've learned it all in English.
Yes,
for the most part.
And I have to, and I need to convert the terminology to Portuguese, which then might not be the right terminology.
Right.
And so I really do struggle explaining linguistic concepts in Portuguese. So
Right.
there's that. So does that make me more of a speaker of English or more of a speaker of Portuguese? So yeah, what?
It's tricky.
It's very tricky, and
Should we do one final?
yes, a little bit to finish. I just got distracted with something there.
Do you have any closing thoughts about fluency, what that means, how people perceive it?
I think fluency is a matter of speed, right? Has less to do with as a matter of perception and speed, and the way I see it, fluency is a matter of speed, perception, and accent. So I have this friend of mine met with the translator friend, my partner, that knows Portuguese grammar way better than I do, and talked to him, and he was like, "Hey, is this Portuguese really that good?" Why? He was judging based on his accent, because the guy has an accent,
right?
But yet his syntax, grammar, writing is amazing,
right?
Because he was basing his speech, he's basing his accent,
right? He thinks he's less proficient because he carries a foreign accent.
Because he carries a foreign accent in Portuguese, and he messes up the gender of some words here and there. But in writing, in writing and reading and building sentences, the guy's amazing. Even vocabulary, and even lexical richness.
Yeah.
The guy got a superior level in the ACTFL.
Crazy.
In the OPI. So that's the thing. The guy's considered a superior, but yet when you listen to him speak, it's like, okay, he definitely has an accent, but yeah, ACTFL considers him a superior level.
Right.
And there's also another thing, speed. What I mean about speed, how fast can you build sentences, and how fast can you produce them, your output.
Yeah.
That's what we call the skill in speaking. But the thing, what we actually mean by that is how fast can you produce a coherent sentence
Right.
and speak it without stuttering, without thinking, and without rethinking the message, without being able to, let's say, correcting yourself after.
Mm. Right. Being able to get through something without
Exactly.
like correcting yourself.
Exactly. So you can do that in a very short amount of time. Actually, some people on YouTube they train the same sentences, same sentence structures over and over again, and then they go out and experiment with people to impress them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So some people
We can memorize things and
we
sound
can
really good.
we can memorize things and sound really good, but the thing is that your comprehension is going to be pretty bad.
Right.
And that's actually very impressive, given the look bias I talked to you about. We're gonna get deeper into that in a future episode. The look bias, like imagine a black guy speaking Japanese, right? It's the or you're gonna have a videos like of white guy, American guy speaks Mandarin in China, and then that video is going to get a ton of views, or oh, very impressive. The people get impressed, right? Because the look doesn't match with the idea of what they speak.
Right.
Or that you can find videos like white guy speaks Yoruba or any African language. You're like, what? You're speaking that?
Right.
Or Korean guy speaks Arabic. I've seen those too.
Yeah.
But then again, you never see American guy speaking Russian in Russia.
Because it doesn't.
It does because it doesn't. It might impress them like, oh, you speak Russian, but it doesn't really. The image.
Right.
Is not, I would say, the unexpected image that creates shock and that creates the whoa, impressive.
Totally.
Or you can get the very cool thumbnail and clickbait. Gringo habla español en Mexico. that's
amazing.
So yeah, so that this also plays an effect in how people perceive you and how you're proficient you are.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, this is my final remarks on this. How rare is it to hear someone speak that language? Have you ever thought about that?
Just like I've never met someone who speaks.
How many people? I'm thinking here, aside from people on the internet, how many times I've heard foreigners speak Portuguese? How many times I've met in my life?
Right.
Not many.
Sure.
How many foreign English speakers you hear? A lot. So you're used to them. So in English you're used to the idea of people speaking your language weirdly or making mistakes. But in a language like Arabic, for example,
I see what you're saying.
You're not really very used to it. Or I've heard in Mandarin Chinese, for example, they're not used to listen to people speak their language. So I don't know how they react to like, oh, you're speaking Mandarin.
Yeah.
I've seen missionaries from the church, or from the Mormon church, who served in Japan. Their mission in Japan, learned Japanese, and then one of them telling me is like I talked to the guy on the phone. He said he thought he was speaking with a Japanese person.
Wow.
And when he met me, he saw this scrawny white Brazilian guy speaking Japanese, and his brain was like, "What is going on?"
Right.
So that actually happens, right? The bias of looks.
Yes, that makes sense, and that will change how someone perceives your fluency. Maybe even if you're very fluent.
Yes.
Maybe fluid is a better way to say
But
that.
fluid.
You can speak fluidly.
If you're fluidly, but the thing is, well, it depends on their perception. Like, well, the fact that you're a foreigner, does that make you automatically, okay, you're really bad at the language or very good at it, or like you're impressive? It'll depend on the person's perception of you and how they deal with foreigners too. There's also a lot that plays a role too. So it's a very complex thing. So the question is, are you fluent?
No comment.
No comment. So what do you guys think of fluency? For you, what does fluent mean to you? When someone says, okay, you speak this language fluently, when you ask, what you speak this language fluently, what do you mean by that? So leave that in comments.
We want to hear your thoughts.
So don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching, and arrivederci.
Ciao.